Rainer Holloway always believed in living life on his own terms. His 5-acre plot of land on the outskirts of Kinsman Park, Texas, was more than just land. It was his sanctuary. A decade ago, when he bought the place, it was nothing more than a quiet stretch of open fields and scattered farmhouses. It was a peaceful, untouched corner of the world where he could breathe, think, and just live. The sky above was endless, stretching as far as the eye could see. There were no rows of cookie-cutter homes, no oppressive rules telling him what to do or how to live. It was a place he could truly call his own. But time, as it often does, changed things. The land around him started to develop, and soon enough, the pristine neighborhood of Hickory Crest was born. It wasn't like the sleepy little town Rainer had once known. Hickory Crest was perfectly manicured, every house uniform in shape, every lawn trimmed to a precise 1.5 inches, and every mailbox stood in line like soldiers at attention. Everything was controlled by the HOA, the Homeowners Association, with one woman at the helm, Diane Kendall. She wasn't just the president of the HOA. She was the self-appointed ruler of the neighborhood. Diane had taken her role as HOA president seriously. She enforced her vision of perfection with an iron fist, setting rules that seemed designed more to annoy than to improve life for the people living there. No holiday decorations were allowed for more than 14 days. Only 4 colors were approved for house exteriors, and any violation, no matter how small, came with a fine. Over time, Hickory Crest had become a well-oiled machine of compliance, where people followed the rules out of habit or out of fear of what would happen if they didn't. But there was one problem. Rainer. Rainer's land stood defiantly at the edge of Hickory Crest. While the other homes were perfect little models of suburban life, his house was a sturdy, unpolished structure, more rugged than anything in the neighborhood. His land wasn't manicured. It was wild, with towering oak trees lining the property and a thick hedge that separated it from the controlled, uniform homes of Hickory Crest. And worst of all, Rainer wasn't part of the HOA. He never signed any agreements, never paid any fees, and never acknowledged Diane's authority. To Diane, his land was an eyesore. It was a blemish on her perfect little community. She couldn't stand that someone like him, someone who refused to fall in line, existed just on the other side of her perfectly curated world. But as long as Rainer kept to himself, there was little Diane could do. That is, until things began to change. Hickory Crest was expanding, and Diane saw an opportunity, a chance to finally bring Rainer's land under the HOA's control. She had plans. She was going to turn his land into a community park, a pristine green space where children could play and families could gather. It wasn't just about aesthetics anymore for Diane. It was about control. And in her eyes, Rainer was standing in the way of her legacy. One afternoon, as the Texas sun cast long shadows across Rainer's porch, Diane arrived at his doorstep. She wasn't alone. Flanking her were 2 men in business suits, looking as out of place as a suit in the middle of a field. Diane had a folder in her hand, the leather bound and thick with contracts and legal jargon, no doubt filled with an offer she assumed Rainer wouldn't refuse. She stepped onto the porch, her smile practiced, the kind that masked the storm brewing beneath the surface. Her suit was perfectly tailored, her blonde hair pulled tightly into a bun, exuding an air of absolute control. The men behind her stood silently, their expressions neutral but watchful. Rainer didn't stand up to greet her. He stayed seated in his worn-out wooden chair, boots crossed at the ankles, a cold beer in his hand. He already knew how this conversation was going to go. He wasn't worried. "Rainer," Diane greeted him, her voice sweet as syrup. "It's always a pleasure." Rainer tipped his hat up to get a better look at her, his voice lazy. "What's on your mind, Diane?" She exhaled sharply, her fake smile barely holding on. "Let's cut to the chase, shall we?" She opened the folder and slid a thick envelope across the table. "We're offering you a generous price for your property, far above market value. It's an opportunity most people would kill for." Rainer didn't even glance at the papers. He took another slow sip of his beer. "Not selling." Diane's smile faltered, but only for a second. She was prepared for resistance, but not this quick. "Rainer, Hickory Crest is expanding. The community needs new recreational spaces, and your land is the perfect location for a park. A beautiful open green space where families can gather. This isn't just a sale. It's a contribution to something bigger than yourself." Rainer chuckled under his breath. That's funny. Last I checked, my land was mine, not some community project. Diane's patience was starting to wear thin. I understand you value your independence, she said, her tone still measured but carrying an edge. But the reality is, this area is changing. Holding on to this land is impractical. Eventually, you'll have no choice but to sell. I'm giving you the chance to do it on your own terms. Raynor leaned forward slightly, his gaze unwavering. On my own terms. He let the words hang in the air for a moment. Let me make this real simple for you, Diane. I'm not selling. Not today, not tomorrow, not ever. Diane's smile disappeared. Her lips pressed into a thin line. You're making a mistake. Raynor stood up, stretching his arms. He was taller than her, and in that moment, he seemed even bigger. No, Diane. You are. There was a brief silence, thick with the tension of two people who were too stubborn to back down. Diane nodded to the two men beside her. They gathered their papers, but Diane wasn't done yet. She turned back to Raynor, her eyes sharp, predatory. I'd hate to see you start having difficulties, Raynor, she said, her voice low, almost a whisper. This land can become quite a burden when the wrong people decide it's a problem. Raynor exhaled through his nose, a smirk playing on his lips. That a threat? Diane's smile returned, colder now. Of course not. Just some friendly advice. You have a good day now. She turned on her heel and walked briskly back toward the car, the two legal representatives following her. Raynor stood there, watching them go, already knowing that this wasn't over. This was only the beginning. The next morning, as Raynor stepped out onto his porch with a fresh cup of coffee, everything seemed normal until he noticed a bright orange notice plastered onto his mailbox. Frowning, he walked over and ripped it off, scanning the bold print at the top. Violation notice. Failure to maintain aesthetic standards fine. $500. He let out a short, humorless laugh. Aesthetic standards? This had to be some kind of mistake. He wasn't even part of the HOA. Turning the paper over, his eyes landed on something even more absurd. The official Hickory Crest HOA logo stamped at the bottom. Before he could process it, movement caught his eye. At the edge of his property, a small group of clipboard-wielding individuals stood, murmuring among themselves, casting occasional glances toward his house. Raynor narrowed his eyes, recognizing a few of them. They were residents from Hickory Crest, people he had never spoken to. He walked toward them, his boots crunching on the gravel as he approached. The murmuring stopped. They looked between him and the papers they were scribbling on. Morning, Raynor said, his voice calm but firm. Something I can help you with. One of the men, a balding guy with wire-rimmed glasses and an HOA badge, cleared his throat. Just conducting a routine assessment. Assessment of what exactly? The property. Your lawn, specifically. It doesn't comply with community standards, the man said, adjusting his glasses. Also, there's an unauthorized structure on your land. Raynor scowled. You mean my shed? The one that's been here for over a decade. The man faltered. Well, under the new HOA guidelines, all properties adjacent to Hickory Crest must adhere to certain uniformity standards. Since your land borders our community, you fall under our jurisdiction for maintaining property values. Raynor stepped forward, towering over the man. That's cute, but I don't remember signing anything that gives you people authority over my land. The man faltered again. Well, no, but the HOA has the right to enforce external regulations to preserve neighborhood aesthetics. If violations aren't addressed, fines will be issued. Raynor's jaw tightened. This was the first move in Diane's game. All right, he said, exhaling. You do what you gotta do, and I'll do what I gotta do. He turned and walked back toward his house, leaving the group standing there, visibly uneasy. But the harassment didn't stop there. The next morning, Raynor walked outside to find his mailbox knocked clean off its post, the wooden base splintered as if it had been hit with a sledgehammer. No cameras, no proof, just a mysteriously destroyed mailbox. Then came the letters. Every other day, new violation notices were stuffed into his doorframe. Some were for his unkempt lawn, others accused him of excessive outdoor storage, which Raynor assumed referred to the stack of firewood near his fence. And then came the final insult. A thick envelope marked invoice. Unpaid HOA dues $1,250. Raynor's stomach twisted when he saw the amount. His fingers tightened around the paper. They weren't just harassing him anymore. They were trying to force him under their control. 2 days after receiving the fraudulent bill, Rayner woke up to the sound of heavy machinery. At the far edge of his property, a crew of workers in fluorescent vests was staking the land with wooden posts and neon orange flags. One man hammered a large wooden sign into the ground that read, "Future site of Hickory Crest Community Park construction begins soon." Rayner's blood ran cold. He walked across the yard, his steps purposeful and fueled by simmering anger. "Hey!" he shouted, his voice booming over the sound of drills and hammers. The workers paused, glancing at him. One man, an older guy with graying hair and a clipboard, looked up. "Can I help you, sir?" Rayner's jaw clenched. "Yeah, you can explain why the hell you're staking claims on my land." The man blinked. "This is HOA property, sir. We've been contracted to begin site preparations for the community park." Rayner's lip curled. "That's funny, because this land," he gestured at the ground beneath his boots, "belongs to me." The worker flipped through his clipboard, his expression faltering. "It says here that this land was recently incorporated into the Hickory Crest HOA jurisdiction." "That's a damn lie," Rayner growled. "Your paperwork is either forged or just plain wrong." Rayner took another step forward, his voice low and dangerous. "Now you and your crew have about 10 seconds to pack up your crap and leave before I call the sheriff and have you all charged with trespassing." The workers exchanged nervous glances. They weren't paid enough to get involved in a legal battle. With a sigh, the older man rubbed the back of his neck. "Look, we're just following orders. If you've got an issue, take it up with the HOA." "Oh, believe me," Rayner snarled, "I will." Rayner yanked the wooden sign out of the ground, tossed it into the back of his truck, and walked straight to the Hickory Crest HOA office. The building was a pristine, red brick structure at the entrance of the community, looking more like a corporate law firm than a neighborhood office. Everything about it screamed sterile professionalism. The receptionist was sitting behind a white desk, wearing a tight, forced smile. Rayner didn't wait to be acknowledged. He walked straight up to the counter and slammed the wooden sign down with a loud thud. "I need to speak to Diane," Rayner said, his voice dangerously calm. The receptionist hesitated. "Do you have an appointment?" "No, but tell her that if she doesn't see me now, my next stop is the sheriff's office." The receptionist scrambled, and less than a minute later, Diane Kendall emerged from a side office, her expression already composed but her posture stiff. "Rayner," she greeted smoothly. "What an unexpected visit." Rayner didn't waste time. "Cut the crap, Diane. I just caught your crew trying to stake claim to my land. Want to explain?" Diane's lips curled into a tight smile. "Oh, that's just a misunderstanding." Rayner scoffed. "Your paperwork says my land belongs to you now. That's not a misunderstanding. That's fraud." Diane exhaled dramatically. "The HOA recently passed a new community planning initiative," she explained, her tone condescending. "Under it, we have the right to incorporate underutilized or adjacent properties into our jurisdiction if it benefits the community." Rayner's hands clenched into fists. "So you just decided my land belonged to you?" Diane nodded slowly. In a manner of speaking, yes. Rayner's pulse pounded in his ears. He leaned in, his voice low and lethal. "You do realize that what you're doing is illegal, right? You can't just steal private property." Diane chuckled softly, almost mockingly. "Rayner, you're thinking too small. This isn't about stealing your land. It's about making the right choice for the community. You can fight us all you want, but the reality is, this is happening. The county supports us. The board supports us. And soon, even the courts will see things our way. It's only a matter of time." Rayner could feel his blood boiling, but he forced himself to remain calm. "You're insane." Diane tilted her head. "No, Rayner. I'm just efficient." Rayner picked up the wooden sign and tucked it under his arm. "You better pray you have your paperwork in order," he said coldly. "Because if you don't, I'm going to bury you." Diane's smile faltered, just for a second. Rayner turned on his heel, slamming the door behind him. This wasn't some petty HOA harassment anymore. This was war. Rayner barely made it home before he was already on the phone with his lawyer, Mark Calloway. This was serious. They weren't just harassing him. They were trying to steal his land. Mark wasted no time, filing a formal complaint to the county land records office. Meanwhile, Rayner dug through the HOA's financials, uncovering evidence of fraud, illegal fines, and embezzlement. Soon, a growing group of Hickory Crest residents rallied around Rayner, all united against the tyrannical HOA. And just when Diane thought she had won, everything began to crumble. The county confirmed that Rayner's property deed was still legally his. The HOA's claim was fraudulent. And then, the scandal broke. Financial fraud, extortion, and mismanagement. Diane was arrested, and the HOA was dismantled piece by piece. As for Rayner, he walked to the edge of his property, where the HOA had once tried to stake their claim, and installed a massive wooden sign that read, "Private property, a way not welcome." And as he stood there, watching the sun set over his land, Rayner allowed himself a rare smile. Freedom had won.